Have you ever wondered what a person feels when they slowly freeze to death? December 1944, the Ardennes, minus 25 degrees. An American soldier sits in the snow, leaning against a pine tree. His feet have blackened from frostbite. He can no longer walk. A German guard slowly pulls out his pistol. Don't shoot. Please. 7,000 American soldiers were captured in a single night. They were lined up in columns and driven through the frozen forests of Germany. Without food, without water, in frozen clothes. We slept pressed against each other in freight cars, 80 men per car. 2 corpses stood in the corner frozen like statues. We couldn't even lay them down. What I'm about to tell you is not fiction. Every detail is documented. This story isn't told in textbooks. It's too horrific. Some survivors claim that Germans deliberately left bread on the road. Anyone who bent down to pick it up got a bullet to the back of their head, just for entertainment. And you know what's most terrifying? This didn't happen to some nameless soldiers. This happened to ordinary guys. Students, farmers, teachers. Just like you and me. This is a story about how civilized people turned into monsters, and about how their victims fought for every breath in the frozen hell of the Ardennes. Today I will tell you the whole truth about the death march of the 106th Division. December 15th, 1944, 23:30. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The snow falls silently through the black pine trees, blanketing the earth in a deceptive peace. Private First Class Alan Thompson of the 106th Infantry Division huddles in his foxhole, the freezing air burning his lungs with each breath. His unit had arrived just 5 days ago to this quiet sector, a place for new divisions to acclimate to combat conditions before being sent to more active fronts. The cold is their enemy tonight, or so they believe. The 106th Division, the Golden Lions, are mostly young men with minimal combat experience. Many, like Thompson, are barely out of high school. They occupy a 27-mile stretch of the front, a distance that military doctrine says should be covered by an entire corps, not a single division. Their positions straddle the Belgian-German border, with the thick Ardennes forest surrounding them and the looming Schnee-Eifel heights at their backs. Thompson hears a sound in the distance, the faint rumble of engines. The officer on duty dismisses it as German trucks repositioning supplies. Intelligence reports have repeatedly stated that the Germans are incapable of mounting an offensive. The area is quiet, safe. In less than 6 hours, Thompson's world will erupt into a frozen hell. Less than 20 miles away, in the darkness of the forest, over 200,000 German troops, 600 tanks, and 1,900 artillery pieces are quietly assembling. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and capture Antwerp, is about to begin. The 106th Division sits directly in the path of the main thrust of the German offensive, and they have no idea what is coming. The temperature drops to 20 degrees below zero. The forest grows silent except for the wind. The darkness hides the German forces completing their final preparations. In a few hours, thousands of American soldiers will be dead, wounded, or captured in one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. The horror that awaits in the frozen forests of the Ardennes will forever be seared into the memory of those who survive. December 16, 1944, 5:30. The pre-dawn darkness still cloaks the Ardennes. Private First Class David Miller of the 422nd Regiment, 106th Infantry Division, is awakened by what sounds like distant thunder. But there are no storms in this frozen landscape. The thundering grows louder, more insistent. "Artillery," whispers the sergeant. German artillery. At precisely 0530, over 1,600 German artillery pieces open fire simultaneously along an 80-mile front. The barrage focuses heavily on the positions of the 106th Division. The earth shakes as shells tear through the forest, transforming the peaceful woodland into a maelstrom of splinters, fire, and shrapnel. "Stay down," the sergeant screams over the deafening explosions. "Keep your heads down!" Miller presses himself into the frozen ground of his foxhole as a nearby tree explodes, showering him with burning splinters and ice. The barrage is unlike anything in training. It's methodical, precise, designed to shatter nerves as much as defenses. "They've zeroed in on the command posts," reports a runner who dives into their position. Blood streams from a cut on his forehead, freezing in crimson trails. Communications are down across the sector. For an hour and a half, the barrage continues without pause. The forest, once dense and imposing, is transformed into a wasteland of shattered trees and cratered earth. The air fills with a thick haze of smoke, gunpowder, and pulverized snow. When the artillery finally stops at 07 o'clock, an eerie silence descends. Then, through the fog and smoke, dark shapes emerge from the tree line. "Infantry!" someone shouts. "German infantry!" Miller raises his M1 Garand and fires at the advancing shadows. The figures don't stop. There are too many of them. Behind the infantry, the distinctive rumble of tank engines grows louder. "Panzer!" The cry spreads through the American lines like a contagion of fear. Through his binoculars, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Kelly of the 423rd Regiment observes the unfolding disaster. German forces are pouring through the Losheim Gap, a strategic corridor that was supposed to be defended by cavalry units that had been pulled away for rest and refit. The 106th Division's northern flank is completely exposed. By 0830, forward observation posts report German armor and infantry advancing along all approach routes. The 106th Division is facing elements of the German 5th Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division, veteran units from the Eastern Front with years of combat experience. "We need artillery support now!" Kelly barks into the field telephone, but the line is dead. German infiltrators have cut the wires. Radio communications are jammed by German electronic warfare units. The 106th is fighting blind, each unit isolated and alone in the frozen hell of the Ardennes. December 16, 1944, 10 o'clock. The command post of Major General Alan Jones, commander of the 106th Infantry Division, is a scene of controlled chaos. Reports flood in from those units still able to communicate, painting a grim picture of the situation. "Sir, the 14th Cavalry Group has been overrun at the Losheim Gap," reports a staff officer, his voice tight with tension. "German armor is pouring through. They're driving west, toward St. Vith." General Jones studies the map, his face grave. St. Vith is a critical road junction. If it falls, the entire northern shoulder of the American line will collapse. The 422nd and 423rd are reporting heavy contact along their entire front, continues the officer. "They're holding for now, but German forces are infiltrating through the gaps." Jones knows his division is in grave danger. His 3 regiments, the 422nd, 423rd, and 424th, are spread too thin. The 422nd and 423rd are positioned on the Schnee Eifel, a heavily forested ridge that juts into German territory. It's a vulnerable salient that could easily be cut off. "Get me General Middleton," orders Jones, referring to the commander of the 8th Corps. When Middleton comes on the line, Jones reports the situation and requests permission to pull the 422nd and 423rd Regiments back from their exposed positions. "Negative," comes the response. "Hold your positions. Reinforcements are on the way." But Jones knows reinforcements will take time to arrive, time his men don't have. The nearest substantial American forces are over 50 miles away. By noon, German armor has broken through at several points. The 18th Volksgrenadier Division and elements of the 62nd Volksgrenadier are driving hard against the 106th positions, while the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler pushes through the Losheim Gap towards St. Vith. At the forward aid station of the 422nd Regiment, Captain Howard McMurray, a medical officer, works desperately to treat the growing number of casualties. Men arrive with horrific wounds from artillery, machine gun fire, and the dreaded tree bursts. Shells exploding in the treetops, sending lethal splinters and shrapnel downward into the foxholes below. "More plasma here!" McMurray shouts as he kneels beside a young soldier whose leg has been nearly severed by shrapnel. The medical supplies are running dangerously low, and evacuation is becoming impossible as German forces cut the roads to the rear. "Captain," a medic approaches, his voice low. "The Germans are less than a mile from here. We need to decide about moving the wounded." McMurray looks around the aid station, a small farmhouse now filled with the groaning wounded. Moving them in this weather, under fire, would be a death sentence for many. Staying means potential capture. "We stay with the wounded," McMurray decides. "Get the Red Cross flags up where they can be seen." As darkness falls on the first day, General Jones receives the news he's been dreading. German armored columns have broken through north and south of the Schnee-Eifel. The 422nd and 423rd Regiments, over 7,000 men, are in danger of being completely surrounded. December 17, 1944, 2 o'clock. The temperature has plummeted to 25 degrees below zero. In the foxholes of the 423rd Regiment, the men fight a dual battle against the cold and the enemy. Sergeant Frank Ramirez hasn't slept in nearly 24 hours. His hands are numb despite the gloves, and he can no longer feel his feet. Around him, his squad tries to maintain vigilance, but exhaustion and cold are taking their toll. "Sarge," whispers Private Jenkins, "I can't feel my feet at all." Ramirez crawls over to him. "Take your boots off," he orders quietly. Jenkins looks at him like he's lost his mind. "In this cold?" "Do it," Ramirez insists. "If you've got trench foot starting, we need to know now." Jenkins reluctantly removes his boots and socks, revealing white, waxy feet with bluish toes. The early stages of frostbite. "Rub them with snow," Ramirez instructs, following the field manual for cold weather injuries. "Then put on dry socks if you have them." "I don't have dry socks," Jenkins admits. "Everything's soaked." Ramirez pulls an extra pair from his own pack. "Use these. Keep wiggling your toes no matter what." Suddenly, flares illuminate the night sky, casting an eerie white glow over the snow-covered landscape. The crack of rifle fire erupts from the tree line. "They're probing the lines!" Ramirez shouts. "Everyone up!" The German infantry advances through the snow, their white camouflage making them nearly invisible until they're dangerously close. Ramirez and his men open fire, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating their positions. A German potato masher grenade lands in their foxhole. Without hesitation, Ramirez grabs it and hurls it back toward the German lines. The explosion lights up the night, followed by screams. "They're flanking left!" shouts Private Miller. "I can see them moving through the trees." Ramirez radios the situation to company headquarters, but the response is not what he hopes for. "Hold your position," comes the order. "Reinforcements cannot reach you at this time." As dawn breaks, Ramirez can see the gravity of their situation. German forces have established positions on 3 sides of them. Only a narrow corridor to the southwest remains open, and that is under constant artillery fire. At division headquarters, General Jones receives confirmation of what he feared. The 422nd and 423rd Regiments are now completely encircled. German armored units have linked up behind them, cutting off all routes of retreat. "Sir," reports his operations officer, 8th Corps is requesting situation update." Jones stares at the map, the reality of the disaster sinking in. 2 of his 3 regiments, nearly 7,000 men, are surrounded on the Schnee-Eifel. His remaining regiment, the 424th, is barely holding on south of Saint-Vite. "Tell them," Jones says, his voice heavy, "that the 106th Division is fighting for its life." December 17th, 1944, 14:30. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Matthews, commander of the 1st Battalion, 423rd Infantry Regiment, gathers his company commanders in the basement of an abandoned farmhouse serving as their command post. The stone walls tremble with each impact of German artillery. "Gentlemen," Matthews begins, his breath visible in the cold air. "We are completely surrounded. Division HQ has ordered us to break out to the southwest, towards Saint-Vite. We move at dusk." Captain Robert Wilson, commanding A Company, studies the crude map. "Sir, that means crossing the Blyalf-Schönberg Road. German armor has been moving along that road all day." "I'm aware, Captain," Matthews replies. "We'll move in battalion formation. Heavy weapons up front, wounded in the center. Every man carries only essential equipment, ammunition, and 1 day's rations. Destroy everything else." The officers exchange grim looks. They all understand what's not being said. Many of them won't make it. As the meeting concludes, a runner arrives with a message from regimental headquarters. Colonel Charles Cavender, the regimental commander, has received new orders from division. Hold positions and await relief. The breakout is canceled. Matthews reads the message twice. "This is insanity," he mutters. "They're condemning us to capture or death." But orders are orders. Matthews dismisses his officers with instructions to strengthen defenses and conserve ammunition. They're now in a fight for survival. At the 422nd Regiment's positions, the situation is equally dire. Colonel George Deschenaux watches through binoculars as German Panzer IVs and Tiger tanks methodically destroy his outer defenses. His men are running critically low on ammunition, particularly for the anti-tank weapons. "Sir," reports his intelligence officer, "POW interrogations indicate we're facing elements of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division and the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division. They've been reinforced with armor from the 9th SS Panzer Division." Deschenaux nods grimly. His regiment of largely untested troops is up against veteran German forces, with superior numbers and firepower. The radio crackles with a message from one of his battalion commanders. "German forces have overrun Baker Company's position. At least 40 men killed. They're bringing up flamethrowers." Deschenaux closes his eyes briefly. Baker Company had been holding a critical hill that overlooked their main defense line. In the aid station of the 423rd Medical Company, Captain James Harrison works feverishly to save a young soldier with a chest wound. The farmhouse they've converted into a field hospital is overflowing with wounded. "Morphine's running low," reports a medic. "So is plasma. And we have no more penicillin." Harrison doesn't look up from his patient. "Use what we have for the most critical cases. Triage the rest." The medic hesitates. "Sir, there's something else. German patrols have been spotted less than half a mile from here." Harrison finally looks up, his gloves covered in blood. "Get red crosses up on all 4 sides of the building. Make them visible." "Do you think they'll respect them?" the medic asks quietly. Harrison returns to his patient. "We're about to find out." December 18, 1944, 600. The third day of battle dawns with heavy fog shrouding the Ardennes. Within the surrounded American positions, the situation deteriorates by the hour. In the command post of the 423rd Regiment, Colonel Cavender receives the morning reports. Ammunition is critically low. Food rations are being stretched. Medical supplies are nearly exhausted. The wounded are suffering terribly in the extreme cold, with no possibility of evacuation. "Sir," his operations officer reports, "we've lost contact with 1st Battalion. Their last transmission reported German infantry overrunning their positions." Cavender marks another section of his map as lost. His regiment's perimeter is shrinking rapidly. "What about the 422nd?" Cavender asks. "Any contact?" "Sporadic radio communication only. They're in the same situation as us, surrounded and running low on everything." At that moment, a radio operator interrupts. "Colonel, message from division. Authentication confirms it's genuine. Cavender takes the message form and reads it. The order is clear. The 422nd and 423rd Regiments are to attack southwest toward Somvith to break the encirclement. With what? Cavender asks bitterly. We have no armor, limited artillery support, and we're down to less than 50 rounds per man. Nevertheless, orders must be followed. Cavender summons his remaining battalion commanders to plan the desperate breakout attempt. Meanwhile, on the western edge of the encirclement, Sergeant Paul Martinez of the 589th Field Artillery Battalion watches in horror as his gun crew's 105mm howitzer fires its last shell. That's it, announces the gun captain. We're dry. Martinez looks at the other 3 howitzers in the battery. They too have fallen silent. Without ammunition, the artillery that has been keeping German armor at bay is now useless. Disable the guns, orders Lieutenant Wallace, the battery commander. We're joining the infantry defense line. The artillerymen remove the breech blocks and firing pins, rendering the howitzers useless to the enemy. Then, armed with their personal weapons, M1 carbines and a few Browning automatic rifles, they move to reinforce the infantry positions. In the encircled area, pockets of intense fighting erupt as German forces probe for weaknesses. At a critical road junction, Company E of the 422nd Regiment repels 3 consecutive assaults by German infantry. The Americans use their remaining ammunition with desperate efficiency, knowing each bullet must count. Captain Thomas Moore watches his men fighting with a mixture of pride and despair. They're performing admirably, but it can't last. As the 3rd German assault pulls back, Moore checks his company's status. 17 men killed, 29 wounded, and ammunition down to less than 20 rounds per man. The radio sputters with a transmission from regiment. All units are to prepare for a coordinated breakout attack at dawn the next day. Moore looks at his executive officer. With these casualties and no ammo, it's a death sentence. What choice do we have? Responds the XO. As night falls, German artillery launches illumination rounds that turn night into eerie day, preventing any covert movement by American forces. The temperature drops again, and the wounded suffer terribly. Some die quietly in the night, their bodies freezing solid before they can be moved. In his command bunker, General Jones receives the most devastating news yet. St. Vith, the critical road junction that was to be the salvation of his surrounded regiments, is now under direct attack by the 1st SS Panzer Division. The planned breakout route for the 422nd and 423rd Regiments may already be closed. December 19, 1944, 0500. The planned breakout attack by the surrounded regiments is scheduled to begin in 1 hour. Throughout the night, the men have prepared as best they can, distributing the remaining ammunition, consolidating the wounded, and destroying equipment that cannot be carried. Colonel Cavender of the 423rd and Colonel Deschanel of the 422nd have coordinated their plans by radio. Their regiments will attack southwest in parallel columns, with what little artillery support remains firing a preparatory barrage. In the pre-dawn darkness, Lieutenant David Harris of the 423rd addresses his platoon. We move fast and we stay together. If someone goes down, we keep moving. Our only chance is to break through to our lines. His men nod solemnly. Most are exhausted, having barely slept in 3 days. Many show signs of frostbite and trench foot. All are running on the last reserves of their strength. At exactly 06 o'clock, the remaining American artillery opens fire, expending their last shells in a brief but intense barrage. Then, with fixed bayonets, the infantry begins to move forward through the snow. Initially, they meet light resistance. The German forces, apparently surprised by the sudden attack, fall back. For a brief moment, hope rises among the Americans. Perhaps they can break through after all. That hope is shattered when they reach the Blyauf-Schönberg Road. Waiting for them is a solid line of German armor and infantry, dug in and ready. The Tigers and Panthers open fire at point-blank range. American soldiers fall by the dozens in the snow, their blood steaming in the cold air. The attack stalls, then disintegrates under the withering German fire. Small groups of American soldiers are cut off from their units, surrounded, and forced to surrender or die. By mid-morning, it's clear that the breakout attempt has failed catastrophically. Colonel Deschanel of the 422nd, his regiment reduced to disorganized groups of surrounded men, makes the agonizing decision to surrender. At 1600, white flags appear above the 422nd's positions. Colonel Cavender of the 423rd holds out longer, hoping for a miracle. But by late afternoon, with his men out of ammunition and surrounded by German armor, he too must face reality. At 1630, he orders his regiment to surrender. In isolated pockets, some American units continue to resist. A platoon from the 423rd's I Company, led by Lieutenant Stephen Miller, refuses the surrender order and attempts to infiltrate through German lines in small groups. Of the 42 men who attempt this escape, only 7 will eventually reach American lines. As darkness falls on December 19th, the surrender is complete. Approximately 7,000 men from the 106th Division, the bulk of the 422nd and 423rd Regiments, along with attached artillery and support units, are now prisoners of war. At his command post, General Jones receives the devastating news. 2/3 of his division has been lost. It is one of the largest mass surrenders of American forces in the European theater. "Sir," his aide says gently, "General Middleton is on the line." Jones takes the phone, his face a mask of grief. "The 422nd and 423rd have surrendered," he reports, his voice hollow. "We've lost them." December 20th, 1944, 800. The captured American soldiers are assembled in a large, snowy field near Schönberg. Thousands of men stand in ragged formation, exhausted, hungry, and in shock at their sudden reversal of fortune. Private James Wilson of the 423rd Regiment surveys the grim scene. Many men are wounded. Some can barely stand. All are suffering from the cold, as the Germans have confiscated their overcoats and gloves. "Form up in columns!" shout the German guards in accented English. "You will march east now!" Wilson helps a wounded comrade to his feet. "Stay with me," he urges. "Don't fall behind." They both know what happens to those who can't keep up. Already, they've heard single shots from behind the marching columns, the fate of those too wounded to continue. The forced march begins, a trudge through snow-covered roads toward Germany. The prisoners have not been fed since their capture. Many are suffering from frostbite, their feet turning black inside wet boots. German guards with shepherd dogs patrol the columns, shouting, "Schnell, schnell!" faster, faster, and prodding stragglers with rifle butts. Occasionally, the column has to move off the road as German reinforcements, tanks, artillery, and fresh troops pass by, heading west toward the still-raging battle. By nightfall, they've covered 15 miles. There is no shelter. The prisoners are forced to sleep in open fields, huddling together for warmth. Some men, especially the wounded, don't wake up in the morning. At the medical collection point near Saint-Vite, Captain Robert Miller, a surgeon with the 106th Medical Battalion who escaped the encirclement, works frantically to save wounded men from the 424th Regiment, the only regiment of the 106th that escaped encirclement. "They hit us with everything," gasps a wounded sergeant being treated for multiple shrapnel wounds. "Tigers, panthers, infantry. We couldn't hold them." Miller doesn't respond, focused on stemming the bleeding. Around him, the aid station is overwhelmed with casualties. Outside, the sound of artillery grows closer. Saint-Vite is under direct attack. "Captain," calls a medic, "evacuation trucks are here. We need to load the wounded now. The Germans are less than 2 miles from here." Miller looks at the dozens of wounded men still awaiting treatment. "How many trucks?" "Just 3, the medic admits. We can only take the most critical cases." Miller makes the brutal triage decisions, selecting which wounded will be evacuated and which must remain, likely to be captured when the Germans arrive. Back at the 106th Division's command post, now relocated west of Saint-Vite, General Jones receives orders from 8th Corps. Hold the new defensive line at all costs to protect the critical road junction at Bastogne. Jones looks at the remnants of his division, primarily the 424th Regiment, reinforced with engineers, headquarters personnel, and stragglers who escaped the encirclement. In just 4 days, his division has been reduced from over 14,000 men to fewer than 5,000 effective soldiers. "We hold," Jones tells his staff, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "We give the 82nd and 101st Airborne time to get into position at Bastogne." His men nod grimly. They've heard the rumors. The 101st Airborne is being rushed to Bastogne, where they'll soon find themselves surrounded just as the 106th was. The battle is far from over. December 21st, 1944. The prisoner column, now stretching for miles, continues its eastward march through the frozen landscape. Private Wilson's lips are cracked and bleeding from dehydration and cold. His stomach has long since stopped growling. Now it's just a constant gnawing emptiness. "Water!" someone calls out as they pass a frozen stream. Men break ranks, rushing toward the ice, desperately trying to break it with rifle butts that the Germans have allowed them to carry for this purpose. German guards fire warning shots in the air, but then relent, allowing small groups to approach the stream in turns. Wilson breaks the ice with the butt of his rifle and scoops up the frigid water with his hands, drinking greedily despite the pain it causes his cracked lips. "Not too much," warns Sergeant Miller beside him. "You'll get cramps. Small sips." The march resumes after the brief water break. By midday, they reach a collection point near Prüm, Germany, where hundreds more American prisoners from other captured units await. For the first time since their capture, they are given food: a thin soup and a small piece of black bread per man. "This isn't enough to keep a bird alive," mutters a soldier nearby. "Quiet," hisses Wilson. "Just eat it and be grateful." That night, the prisoners are herded into a fenced compound. There are no buildings, just open ground. The men dig into the snow with their hands and helmets, creating shallow depressions to shield themselves from the wind. Wilson lies awake, staring at the stars, wondering if his family has been notified of his capture yet, or if he's still listed as missing in action. Around him, men cough, groan, and weep quietly. The sound of occasional gunfire from the west is a reminder that the battle continues without them. In what remains of the 106th Division's zone, the 424th Regiment fights a desperate holding action alongside Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division. Saint-Vith, the critical road junction, is under constant attack by the 1st SS Panzer Division. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Durand, commanding the 3rd Battalion of the 424th, watches through binoculars as German tanks probe his lines. "They're looking for weak spots," he tells his operations officer. "Shift our bazookas to cover that approach." His battalion is down to 65% strength after 3 days of continuous combat. Ammunition is running low, especially for the anti-tank weapons. Every hour brings reports of German infiltration attempts, some successful. At the division command post, a staff officer bursts in with news. "Sir, Saint-Vith has fallen. German armor has broken through the town center." General Jones absorbs the blow. Saint-Vith was the linchpin of their defense. Without it, their position is untenable. "Order a fighting withdrawal," Jones commands. "We'll establish a new line 5 miles west. Coordinate with the 7th Armored Division for covering fire." As night falls, the withdrawal begins. A dangerous operation under the best conditions, now conducted in darkness, snow, and under enemy pressure. Units must disengage while maintaining enough combat power to fight if discovered. For the men of the 424th, it's another sleepless night of frigid foxholes and constant vigilance. Many have been fighting for 5 days straight, with minimal rest, food, or relief from the cold. "Just hold on," Durand tells his exhausted men. "Reinforcements are coming. Patton's Third Army is on the way." Whether this is true or merely a morale-boosting rumor, no one knows for certain. But it gives the freezing, exhausted men something to cling to. A reason to endure one more night in the frozen hell of the Ardennes. December 22, 1944.
The prisoner column reaches the German town of Gerolstein, where a rail yard has been prepared for their transport deeper into Germany. Private Wilson and the other prisoners stare at the waiting boxcars with dread. "Those are cattle cars," murmurs Sergeant Miller. "They're going to pack us in like animals." The German guards begin dividing the prisoners into groups of 60 to 80 men per boxcar, far more than the cars were designed to hold. Wilson finds himself shoved into a boxcar with 70 other men. The door slides shut with a metallic bang, and darkness engulfs them. There is barely room to stand, let alone sit or lie down. The car has no heating, no sanitation facilities, just a small barred window high on each side that lets in freezing air. The floor is covered with old hay and animal dung from its previous cargo. "We need to organize," says a captain who has ended up in their car. "Take turns sitting down. Those who stand should keep moving to maintain circulation." The men try to establish a rotation, but it's nearly impossible in the cramped space. Hours pass with agonizing slowness. The temperature drops further as night falls. Men press together for warmth, their breath creating a fog inside the car. Sometime in the night, the train begins to move with a jolt, heading east toward the heart of Germany. Many prisoners realize they're being taken far from the front lines, diminishing any hope of rescue or escape. Back at the new American defensive line west of Sanfith, the remnants of the 106th Division dig in alongside elements of the 7th Armored and 9th Armored Divisions. The consolidated force has been designated Fortified Goose Egg due to the oval shape of their defensive perimeter on the map. Major General Alan Jones has been relieved of command, suffering from exhaustion and the emotional toll of losing 2/3 of his division. Brigadier General Herbert Perrin has assumed command of what remains of the 106th. "They'll hit us again at dawn," Perrin tells his staff during the night briefing. Intelligence reports indicate the Germans are bringing up fresh armor from the 2nd SS Panzer Division. An aide enters with a message from 8th Corps headquarters. "Fortified Goose Egg position to be abandoned. All units to withdraw west of the Somme River by 0600 hours. Perrin reads the message twice. "This is it, gentlemen. We're pulling back to consolidate the northern shoulder. Prepare your units for immediate withdrawal." The retreat must be executed in darkness, through snow-covered roads with enemy forces in close contact. It's a dangerous maneuver that risks turning into a rout if the Germans detect it early. Lieutenant Colonel Durand of the 424th Regiment receives the withdrawal order with mixed emotions. His men are exhausted beyond measure, having fought continuously for 6 days. Yet retreating feels like another defeat. "We're not running," he tells his company commanders. "We're repositioning to better ground. Make sure every man understands that." As American forces withdraw under cover of darkness, the train carrying Private Wilson and thousands of other prisoners continues its slow journey eastward. Inside the overcrowded boxcar, men struggle to survive the cold, hunger, and thirst. 2 men have already died from their wounds, their bodies propped in corners as there's nowhere else to put them. "Water," croaks a young private, his lips cracked and bleeding. "Please, water." But there is none to give. The Germans provide nothing during the journey. Men lick frost from the metal walls of the car out of desperate thirst. Wilson drifts in and out of consciousness, his mind clouded by hunger and exhaustion. In his lucid moments, he wonders how long they can survive these conditions, and what awaits them at their destination. December 23rd, 1944. The prisoner train stops at a rail yard outside Limburg an der Lahn, Germany. When the boxcar doors slide open, German guards are momentarily shocked by the sight and smell that greets them. 70 men crammed together for 2 days without sanitation, food, or water. Several dead bodies that have begun to decompose despite the cold. "Raus! Raus! Out! Out!" the guards shout, prodding the prisoners with rifle butts. Wilson's legs have long since gone numb. He stumbles as he tries to descend from the boxcar, falling into the snow. A guard yanks him roughly to his feet. The prisoners are assembled in the rail yard, surrounded by guards with machine guns. A German officer addresses them in accented English. You will now march to Stalag 12A. It is 5 kilometers. Anyone who cannot walk will be shot. There will be no carrying of comrades. Wilson looks around at his fellow prisoners. Many can barely stand, let alone march 5 kilometers.
Men with frostbitten feet hobble painfully, their faces contorted with every step. The march begins. Within minutes, shots ring out from the rear of the column. Wilson doesn't look back. He knows what it means. Those too weak to continue are being executed. Sergeant Miller walks beside him, his face gaunt with hunger and exhaustion. Just keep moving, he mutters, one foot in front of the other. By the time they reach Stalag 12A, 30 men have been shot along the way. The survivors are processed at the camp entrance, photographed, fingerprinted, and assigned prisoner numbers. Their few remaining personal items are confiscated. Wilson is assigned to a barracks designed for 100 men, but now housing over 300. There are no beds, just wooden platforms where men sleep shoulder to shoulder. A single small stove provides inadequate heat for the large space. This is just a transit camp, explains a British prisoner who's been there for months. Eventually, you'll be sent to a permanent stalag. The officers will go to separate camps, of lags. That afternoon, they receive their first proper meal since capture, a ladle of thin cabbage soup and the small chunk of black bread. For men who haven't eaten in days, it seems like a feast. Meanwhile, at the new American defensive line along the Salm River, the remnants of the 106th Division have established positions alongside other units of the 18th Airborne Corps. The withdrawal was completed just in time. German forces overran their previous positions hours after they left. General Perrin surveys the new line. His division is now down to under 4,000 effective combat soldiers. The 424th Regiment, once 3,000 strong, now musters fewer than 1,200 men. Yet they continue to fight. Ammunition status? Perrin asks his logistics officer. Critically low for artillery, comes the reply. Small arms are adequate for now. We've been promised resupply by airdrop tonight, weather permitting. The weather has been the Germans' ally throughout the offensive. Low clouds and fog have grounded Allied aircraft, preventing them from bringing their overwhelming air superiority to bear. But forecasters predict a clearing within 24 to 48 hours. If we can hold that long, Perrin says quietly. Word begins to spread along the line. The 4th Armored Division, part of Patton's 3rd Army, is driving north toward Bastogne to relieve the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. If true, it means the German offensive is being contained. For the men in the frozen foxholes, it's a glimmer of hope after days of retreat and defeat. Perhaps the tide is turning. But for the 7,000 men of the 106th Division now in German captivity, the war has taken a different turn, one that will lead many of them to months of suffering, and for some, to death in captivity. December 24, 1944. Christmas Eve. At Stalag 12A, Private Wilson and the other prisoners wake to find a light dusting of snow has fallen through holes in the barracks roof. The temperature inside is barely above freezing. A German guard enters, accompanied by a Red Cross representative, a Swiss national who speaks English. I am here to register your names, the Swiss man announces. This information will be transmitted to your government so your families can be notified of your prisoner status. This is the first good news the men have received since their capture. Wilson gives his name, rank, and serial number when his turn comes, hoping the information will eventually reach his parents in Ohio. That evening, the prisoners receive their Christmas ration, an extra piece of bread and a small piece of sausage added to their usual thin soup. In one corner of the barracks, someone starts singing Silent Night. Other voices join in. American, British,
and even some Germans outside. For a brief moment, the war seems far away. Then the reality of their situation returns as a man collapses from exhaustion and illness, triggering a commotion in the crowded barracks. At the American lines along the Somme River, the men of the 106th Division's 424th Regiment also observe Christmas Eve in foxholes and makeshift shelters. A chaplain moves among the positions, offering brief prayers with small groups of men. Lieutenant Colonel Durand sits with his command group in a partially destroyed farmhouse serving as their headquarters. A small fire burns in the hearth, the only concession to the holiday. "Mail arrived with the supply trucks," announces his adjutant, distributing letters and packages from home. Durand opens a letter from his wife in Pennsylvania. It was written weeks ago, before the German offensive, filled with plans for Christmas celebrations that now seem from another world. He reads it by flashlight, his face revealing nothing. The radio crackles with news from division headquarters. The weather is clearing. Allied air forces are expected to begin operations tomorrow, Christmas Day. For the first time in over a week, they will have air support. "Pass the word," Durand orders. "Air support coming tomorrow. It's the best Christmas present we could ask for." Back at Stalag 12A, Private Wilson lies awake on the crowded sleeping platform. Men cough and groan around him, many suffering from pneumonia, dysentery, and infected wounds. Medical care is virtually non-existent. A single German doctor visits the camp twice weekly, and medical supplies are severely limited. Wilson thinks of his family gathering for Christmas Eve dinner, perhaps saying a prayer for him, not knowing if he's alive or dead. The uncertainty must be agonizing for them. "You awake?" whispers Sergeant Miller beside him. "Yeah," Wilson replies. "Can't sleep. Tomorrow they're moving us," Miller says quietly. Overheard the guards. "We're going to Stalag 4B, near Mühlberg." "How far is that?" "Far. Central Germany. We'll be on trains again." Wilson sighs. The thought of another journey in the packed boxcars fills him with dread. But at least they're moving away from the front lines, where they risk being caught in Allied bombing raids. As Christmas Eve turns to Christmas Day, both captives and those still fighting face the stark reality of war in winter. For the men of the 106th Division, separated by hundreds of miles and barbed wire, the holiday brings little joy. Only the hope of survival until the next day. December 25, 1944, Christmas Day. The skies over the Ardennes clear for the first time since the German offensive began. Within hours, the roar of aircraft engines fills the air as hundreds of Allied planes, fighters, fighter bombers, and medium bombers appear overhead. At the American lines, the men of the 106th Division cheer as P-47 Thunderbolts dive on German positions, rockets streaking from their wings. The distinctive crump of bombs follows as B-26 Marauders target German assembly areas and supply routes. "Best Christmas present ever," says a soldier, watching through binoculars as a German tank column is scattered by rocket fire. Lieutenant Colonel Durand studies the map with his operations officer. Intelligence reports indicate the German offensive is losing momentum. Fuel shortages are hampering their armored units, and the clearing skies have allowed Allied air power to sever their supply lines. "Division thinks the Germans will make one more push," Durand tells his staff. "They're desperate to reach the Meuse River before they're forced to withdraw. At Stalag 12A, the prisoners are roused before dawn." "Raus! Schnell!" the guards shout, driving them into the assembly yard. Private Wilson joins the shuffling mass of prisoners. No food or water is provided before they begin the march back to the rail yard. This time, they're loaded 100 men to a boxcar, even more crowded than before. As the train pulls out, the prisoners hear aircraft overhead. Through the small windows, they can see American P-51 Mustangs patrolling the skies. The irony is bitter. Their own Air Force now poses a deadly threat, as Allied pilots have no way of knowing the trains contain American prisoners rather than German troops or supplies. "If they hit us, we're done for," mutters Sergeant Miller. "These boxcars would go up like matchboxes." The train moves slowly, frequently stopping for hours in rail yards or sidings as the German rail system, under constant air attack, struggles to function. During one such stop, near Frankfurt, air raid sirens begin to wail. "Everyone down!" shouts an officer as the distinctive drone of B-17 bombers approaches. The prisoners press themselves to the floor of the boxcar as explosions rock the rail yard. Shrapnel tears through the wooden walls of their car, wounding several men. They can do nothing but wait and pray as the bombing continues for what seems like an eternity. When silence finally returns, they assess the damage. 2 men are dead, 5 wounded. There's still no medical care available. The wounded are tended by their fellow prisoners, using strips torn from their already inadequate clothing as bandages. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the 106th Division, now situated near Vielsalm, Belgium, General Perron receives new orders. The division is to be pulled off the line for rest and reconstitution. The 82nd Airborne Division will take over their sector. Perron studies the casualty figures with a heavy heart. Of the 14,000 men who comprised the 106th Division when it arrived in Europe, fewer than 4,000 remain combat effective. The division has suffered the highest casualty rate of any American division in a comparable time period during the war. "We held," Perron tells his staff, "against impossible odds. We held long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The men should be proud." But pride offers little consolation for the staggering losses. As the remnants of the division prepare to move to rear areas for rest and the integration of replacement troops, the fate of their 7,000 captured comrades remains unknown. On the prisoner train, now moving deeper into Germany, Private Wilson and the others endure their 3rd day without food. Water comes only from snow they can reach through the barred windows when the train stops. The dead are pushed to one end of the car, as there's nowhere else to put them. "Hang on," Sergeant Miller encourages the men around him. "Just keep hanging on. The war is turning. You can feel it." Whether this is true or merely wishful thinking, it gives the prisoners something to cling to. The hope that their captivity might not be as long as they fear. December 26, 1944. The prisoner train arrives at Bad Muskau, Germany, where the men are marched to Stalag 8A. Private Wilson stumbles through the gates, barely able to walk after days of standing in the overcrowded boxcar. The camp is massive, holding thousands of prisoners from various Allied nations. Wilson and the other newly arrived Americans are processed, deloused with DDT powder, given a cursory medical examination, and assigned to barracks. "You're lucky," tells them a French prisoner who's been there since 1940. "The Red Cross packages have arrived. First time in months." Indeed, that evening, each man receives a portion from an American Red Cross parcel: cigarettes, powdered milk, chocolate, canned meat, and soap. For men who have been starving, it's an incredible bounty. Wilson carefully rations his food, knowing that regular Red Cross deliveries are far from guaranteed. He trades 2 cigarettes for an extra blanket with a Polish prisoner, a wise investment for the bitter nights ahead. The camp's reality quickly becomes apparent. The German ration is inadequate: a thin rutabaga soup and 250 grams of bread daily. Dysentery is rampant due to poor sanitation. Barracks are unheated except for a small stove that burns for a few hours each evening, when fuel is available. "Save everything," advises Sergeant Miller. "String, paper, bits of metal. Everything has value here." Wilson notes that the sergeant has already established himself as a leader within their barracks, organizing a fair distribution system for the limited resources and mediating disputes among the increasingly irritable, hungry men. At the former positions of the 106th Division along the Salm River, now manned by the 82nd Airborne Division, the battle continues with unabated fury. The Germans are making their final desperate push to break through to the Meuse River. In a field hospital 20 miles behind the lines, Lieutenant Colonel Durand of the 424th Regiment lies on a stretcher, his leg shattered by artillery fire during the relief operation. Around him are dozens of other wounded men from the 106th Division. A doctor approaches his bed. "Colonel, we're evacuating you to Paris tomorrow. From there, likely back to England for further surgery." Durand nods weakly. "My men?" "What's left of your regiment is being moved to a rest area," the doctor informs him. "They're bringing in replacements, but it will take time to rebuild." "And our captured men? Any word?" The doctor shakes his head. "Nothing definitive yet. The Red Cross is working to establish communication." In truth, the fate of the 7,000 captured men of the 106th Division remains largely unknown to the American command. Reports from the International Red Cross are still being compiled. It will be weeks before most families receive notification of their loved one's prisoner status. At Stalag 8A, the reality of long-term captivity begins to sink in for Private Wilson and the others. The initial shock of capture is giving way to the grinding monotony of prisoner life. Roll calls, meager meals, constant cold, and the struggle to maintain basic hygiene. "We need to keep our minds active," declares a captured lieutenant who was a school teacher before the war. "I'm starting classes in whatever subjects people can teach. Mathematics, languages, history, engineering, anything." Wilson volunteers to join a class in German, reasoning that understanding their captor's language might prove useful. Other men organize discussion groups, craft circles using materials at hand, and even a camp newspaper written on salvaged scraps of paper. It's a desperate attempt to maintain sanity and purpose in a situation where they have lost all control over their lives. As night falls, Wilson stares at the barbed wire perimeter, illuminated by searchlights from the guard towers. Beyond lies Germany. And beyond that, hundreds of miles to Allied lines. Escape seems impossible. Survival, uncertain. All they can do is endure, day by day, and hope the war ends before starvation or disease claims them. December 30th, 1944. At Stalag 8A, Private Wilson has settled into the grim routine of prisoner life. Each day begins with appel, roll call, at 6 a.m., where prisoners stand at attention in the freezing cold, sometimes for hours, as the Germans conduct their count. The camp holds prisoners from multiple Allied nations: Americans, British, French, Poles, and Russians. The Russians are kept separate and treated far worse than the Western prisoners. Wilson can see them from across the camp, skeletal figures in ragged uniforms. "The Germans follow the Geneva Convention for us, more or less," explains an English sergeant who has been a prisoner since Dunkirk in 1940. "But Russia never signed it, so they treat the Russians like animals. Half of them will die before spring." Food remains the primary concern. The official German ration provides barely 1,200 calories per day, insufficient for men who are already underweight. Without Red Cross parcels to supplement this diet, malnutrition quickly sets in. Sergeant Miller organizes their barracks into a communal system where men pool their resources and take turns preparing the meager meals on the single stove. This prevents stronger prisoners from taking advantage of weaker ones and ensures everyone gets their fair share. "In places like this, you see the best and worst of men," Miller tells Wilson during one evening meal. A thin soup made from German rations supplemented with items from Red Cross packages. Some will give their last crust to a sick comrade. Others will steal from the dying. Wilson has already seen this truth firsthand. Some men turn inward, focusing solely on their own survival. Others find strength in helping others. The choices made in these desperate conditions reveal character in its rawest form. Meanwhile, at a replacement depot near Liège, Belgium, the 106th Division is being rebuilt. Fresh troops arrive daily, most of them new arrivals from the United States with minimal combat training. They join the exhausted veterans of the Ardennes in a division that exists mostly on paper. Major General Donald Stroh has taken command of the division, replacing Brigadier General Perrin. Stroh walks through the camp, observing the mixture of hollow-eyed veterans and nervous replacements. "How long before we're combat ready?" he asks his operations officer. "Optimistically, 6 weeks," comes the reply. We've lost all our experienced squad and platoon leaders. The survivors are physically and mentally exhausted. Stroh nods grimly. And still no word on our POWs? The International Red Cross has confirmed approximately 7,000 men from the division in German hands. They're scattered across different stalags in Germany and occupied Poland. This figure represents the largest mass surrender of U.S. troops during the war in Europe, a statistic that the Army is not eager to publicize. For the families back home, the waiting continues. Many have received the dreaded telegram stating their loved one is missing in action, a limbo of uncertainty that can be worse than confirmation of death. At Stalag 8A, life settles into a pattern of grinding deprivation. Private Wilson loses track of days, marking time only by the increasing weakness in his body as malnutrition takes its toll. Men around him grow gaunt, their uniforms hanging loosely on diminishing frames. Disease spreads rapidly in the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Dysentery, pneumonia, and infected wounds claim lives daily. The camp hospital is primitive, lacking basic medications and equipment. German doctors visit rarely, leaving medical care primarily to captured Allied medical personnel, working with grossly inadequate supplies. One morning in early January, Wilson wakes to find the man next to him, a private from Kentucky, has died during the night. His body is already cold. One more casualty of the brutal winter conditions. "Cover him," orders Sergeant Miller. "We'll report it at morning roll call." The body is removed by a prisoner detail later that day. There is no ceremony, no formal notification. The man simply ceases to exist, becoming another statistic in the mounting death toll. "Write down his name and details," Miller tells Wilson. "When we get home, his family should know." Wilson nods, adding the information to the small notebook he maintains, a record of the dead that he keeps hidden in his boot. It's a small act of defiance and remembrance in a place designed to strip men of their identity and dignity. As January progresses, rumors spread through the camp. The Soviet army is advancing from the east. Some prisoners take hope from this news, imagining liberation by Russian forces. Others fear it, knowing the chaos that would likely accompany such an event, and the uncertain treatment they might receive from their Soviet liberators. For now, they can only continue the daily struggle to survive, never knowing if the next day will bring liberation, transfer deeper into Germany, or death from the myriad threats that surround them. January 15, 1945. At Stalag 8A, the distant sound of artillery can occasionally be heard from the east, evidence of the Soviet advance into Poland. The German guards appear increasingly nervous, confiscating radios and cracking down on any prisoner communication. Private Wilson has lost over 30 pounds since his capture. His uniform hangs loosely on his frame, and he, like most prisoners, has tied string around his waist to keep his pants up. The camp has received no Red Cross parcels for 3 weeks, forcing the men to survive on the inadequate German rations alone. "Something's happening," Sergeant Miller tells Wilson during their meager breakfast of watery barley gruel. "The guards are destroying documents. I've seen smoke from the administration building for 2 days." Indeed, preparations for evacuation are underway, though the prisoners have received no official notification. As the Soviet forces approach from the east, the German High Command has ordered POWs to be moved westward, away from potential liberation. On January 20th, the order finally comes. At 4 a.m., prisoners are roused from their barracks and ordered to assemble in the main yard. A German officer addresses them through a translator. "The camp is being evacuated immediately. Each man will receive 3 days' rations. You will march west. Anyone attempting to escape will be shot. Anyone unable to keep up will be left behind." The 3 days' rations turn out to be a single loaf of bread and a small piece of sausage per man, clearly insufficient for the journey ahead. No information is provided about their destination or how long the march will take. As dawn breaks, the prisoners, thousands of them, file through the camp gates under heavy guard. The temperature is well below freezing, with snow falling steadily. Many men are inadequately clothed, their boots falling apart, their bodies already weakened by months of malnutrition. "Stay together," Sergeant Miller tells the men from their barracks. "Watch each other. If someone starts to fall behind, we help them." The march begins at a brutally fast pace set by the German guards, many of whom are riding bicycles or horses alongside the column. Within hours, men begin to struggle. Those with frostbitten feet or illness quickly fall behind.
Wilson helps support a young private who's limping badly, his frost-damaged feet causing him agony with each step. They manage to maintain their position in the column, but all around them, men are falling back. Occasional shots from behind indicate the fate of those who can no longer keep up. By nightfall, they've covered nearly 20 miles through snow-covered roads. There is no shelter provided. The prisoners are herded into open fields and told to sleep as best they can. Men huddle together for warmth, using whatever they have: blankets, coats, even paper, as insulation against the frozen ground. "This is going to be worse than the camp," mutters a soldier nearby. "They're marching us to death." Wilson can't disagree. Already, dozens have died or been shot during the first day's march. The brutal pace, combined with their weakened condition and the extreme cold, makes survival a matter of will as much as physical strength. Similar scenes are playing out across eastern Germany and Poland, as the Germans evacuate POW camps ahead of the Soviet advance. These forced marches, later to be known as the March or Death Marches by survivors, will claim thousands of lives in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, near the Belgian border, the rebuilt 106th Infantry Division receives orders to return to the front lines. The division has been reinforced with replacement troops, though it remains well below full strength. Many of the survivors of the Ardennes suffer from what will later be recognized as combat fatigue or PTSD. General Stroh addresses his officers before their deployment. "We have a dual mission: to fight the enemy before us and to honor the memory of our lost comrades by performing our duty with excellence. Many of our men are still in German hands. We fight for them as well." The division moves toward the Siegfried Line, the German defensive network along their western border. The war has turned decisively against Germany, but hard fighting remains ahead. For Private Wilson and the other prisoners on the march, their war has become a simple struggle for survival. Each day brings new challenges: finding shelter, avoiding frostbite, supplementing their minimal rations by scavenging in fields they pass, and maintaining the will to continue when giving up would be easier. "One day at a time," Sergeant Miller tells them each morning as they rise stiffly from the frozen ground. "Just live one day at a time." It becomes their mantra, a focus on immediate survival that helps them avoid being overwhelmed by the uncertainty of their situation and the seemingly endless march stretching before them. January 25, 1945. 5 days into the forced march, the column of prisoners from Stalag 8A has covered over 100 miles of snow-covered roads. Private Wilson trudges forward mechanically, his mind focused solely on placing one foot in front of the other. Around him, men collapse regularly from exhaustion, illness, and exposure. The German guard's attitude has hardened. Those who fall behind are no longer even given the pretense of medical attention. A shot rings out, and the column moves on. The prisoners have learned not to look back. Their rations were exhausted days ago. Now they survive by scavenging, digging for frozen potatoes in fields they pass, trading valuables for food with German civilians, when the guards allow it, or eating snow to stave off dehydration. "Where are they taking us?" Wilson asks Sergeant Miller during a brief rest halt. Miller shakes his head. "West, away from the Russians. Beyond that, who knows? There are camps all over Germany." That night, they reach a small town where the local burgermeister, mayor, has arranged for them to sleep in a series of barns. It's the first shelter they've had in days.
Wilson collapses onto the straw-covered floor, too exhausted even to eat the meager turnip soup provided by their captors.
Check your feet, Miller reminds the men. Everyone check for frostbite. Wilson removes his boots with difficulty. His feet have swollen from the constant marching. The sight that greets him is alarming. His toes are white and numb, the early stages of frostbite. He rubs them vigorously, wincing at the pain as circulation returns. Not everyone is so fortunate. The man next to Wilson, a corporal from the 422nd Regiment, removes his boots to reveal blackened toes, severe frostbite that will likely require amputation. I can't march on these, the corporal says quietly, the implication clear to everyone. Those who cannot continue the march face execution or abandonment. Sergeant Miller examines the man's feet. We'll get you through tomorrow, he promises.
We'll take turns supporting you. The next morning, Miller organizes a rotation. 2 men at a time will support the corporal between them, changing every hour to prevent exhaustion. It's a risk. Helping a struggling comrade might doom the helpers if they deplete their strength too much. As the march continues, they pass refugees fleeing westward. German civilians evacuating ahead of the Soviet advance, their possessions piled on carts or carried on their backs. There's a palpable fear in these civilians that transcends their animosity toward the Allied prisoners. They're terrified of the Russians, observes the lieutenant marching near Wilson. After what the Germans did in Russia, they expect no mercy. The march takes on an increasingly surreal quality as it joins the general westward exodus. German military units, often in disarray, pass the prisoner column heading in the opposite direction, toward the Eastern Front. Occasionally, Allied aircraft appear overhead, strafing anything that looks like a military target. The prisoners throw themselves into ditches alongside their guards during these attacks. On January 30th, after 10 days of marching, they reach their destination, Stalag 3A, near Luckenwalde, about 30 miles south of Berlin. The camp is already overcrowded with prisoners evacuated from other stalags, but somehow they are squeezed in. Wilson finds himself in a tent rather than a barracks, sharing space with 40 other men on a dirt floor with minimal bedding. But after the march, even these conditions seem luxurious. At least they aren't moving and exposed to the elements. The death toll from the march becomes clear as roll calls are conducted. Of the approximately 2,500 men who left Stalag 8A, fewer than 2,000 have arrived at Stalag 3A. Hundreds have died en route from exposure, exhaustion, illness, or execution when they could no longer keep pace.
Sergeant Miller gathers the survivors from their original barracks. We made it this far, he tells them. Now we hold on until the war ends. It can't be much longer. Indeed, the signs of Germany's collapse are evident even to the prisoners. Air raid sirens wail daily as Allied bombers pound Berlin, visible on the horizon from the camp. German guards, once arrogant and strict, now appear increasingly demoralized and concerned with their own futures. For Private Wilson and the other prisoners, a new phase of captivity begins, one tinged with hope that liberation might be months or even weeks away, but also fraught with the danger that comes with the death throes of the Third Reich. February 15, 1945. At Stalag 3A, conditions have deteriorated severely as Germany's infrastructure collapses under Allied bombing. Food deliveries to the camp are sporadic and insufficient. The winter remains brutally cold, and fuel for heating is almost non-existent. Private Wilson has developed a persistent cough that rattles in his chest, likely pneumonia, but the camp's medical facilities are overwhelmed and medicines are unavailable. He is far from alone. Illness spreads rapidly through the overcrowded camp. You need to eat more, Sergeant Miller tells him, offering part of his own bread ration. Wilson shakes his head. Keep it, I'm okay. But he's not okay, and they both know it. The cumulative effects of malnutrition, cold, and disease are taking their toll.
Men are dying daily now, their bodies stacked like cordwood outside the camp hospital until burial details can dig graves in the frozen ground. The Allied bombing raids intensify. Berlin, just 30 miles away, is under almost constant attack. At night, the prisoners can see the glow of fires on the horizon and hear the distant thump of explosives. By day, formations of B-17s and B-24s pass overhead on their way to targets throughout Germany. It's almost over, men tell each other.
Just hold on a little longer. But for many, a little longer is too much to ask. Wilson watches as a man in their tent, a staff sergeant from the 423rd Regiment who survived the entire ordeal from capture in the Ardennes to the death march, simply gives up one morning. He refuses to rise for roll call, refuses food, and turns his face to the wall. By evening, he's dead. Not from any specific ailment, but from the loss of will to continue. "Don't you dare," Miller tells Wilson when he sees him watching. "Don't you dare give up now." Wilson nods, but it's becoming harder each day to find reasons to continue the struggle. His body is failing him, and his mind increasingly drifts to memories of home, his family's farm in Ohio, his mother's cooking, the girl he'd planned to marry after the war. These memories, once comforting, now bring an almost unbearable sense of loss. On February 20th, something unexpected happens. A Red Cross convoy reaches the camp. For the first time in over a month, prisoners receive packages containing food, cigarettes, and basic medical supplies. It's as if life has been injected back into the camp. Wilson receives half a package. They're shared between two men due to the shortage. The powdered milk, chocolate, canned meat, and cigarettes represent unimaginable wealth in the camp economy. He immediately trades 2 cigarettes for sulfa drugs to treat his pneumonia. The mood in the camp lifts perceptibly. Men who had been silent for weeks begin to talk again, to plan, to believe they might survive to see liberation. Meanwhile, on the Western Front, the remnants of the 106th Infantry Division cross the Rhine River into Germany as part of the Allied advance. They've been rebuilt with replacement troops, though many of the key leadership positions are still held by survivors of the Ardennes. The division has been assigned to relatively quiet sectors since returning to combat, an acknowledgement of the trauma they've experienced. But they perform their duties with determination, driven by the memory of their lost comrades. As the Allies push deeper into Germany from both east and west, the prisoners at Stalag 3A begin to hear rumors that they might be moved again, further west, away from the approaching Soviet forces. "If they try to march us again, many won't make it," Miller tells Wilson as they share a cigarette outside their tent, taking advantage of a rare sunny day. Wilson nods, knowing he would likely be among those who wouldn't survive another forced march. The Red Cross packages helped, but his health remains precarious. The camp commandant, sensing the inevitable end of the war, has begun to moderate his treatment of the prisoners. Extra rations are occasionally distributed, and the guards are less quick to resort to violence. It's a calculated move, an attempt to earn good treatment when the Allies arrive. For Private Wilson and the others, it's a daily struggle between hope and despair. Liberation seems tantalizingly close, yet death continues to claim prisoners every day. The question haunting each man is simple: will I survive long enough to go home? March 10, 1945. The sound of distant artillery has become a constant at Stalag 3A. The Soviet forces are approaching from the east, while to the west, American and British armies drive deeper into Germany. Berlin is under almost continuous bombardment, the glow of fires visible on the horizon every night. Private Wilson's health has improved somewhat, thanks to the medicine he obtained by trading cigarettes from his Red Cross package. His cough persists, but the fever has subsided. Like most prisoners, he remains severely underweight, his once 180-pound frame now barely 120 pounds. "The guards are packing," Sergeant Miller informs the men in their tent one morning. "Office equipment, personal belongings. I think they're preparing to leave." Indeed, there's a palpable sense of imminent change in the camp. German guards speak openly about the war's end, sometimes asking prisoners if they'll vouch for their decent treatment when the Allies arrive. The camp commandant has ordered the destruction of records. Smoke rises continuously from the administration building's chimney. On March 15th, an unexpected announcement comes. Due to the proximity of Soviet forces, the International Red Cross has negotiated the release of seriously ill prisoners. Those deemed too sick to survive until liberation will be transported to Switzerland for medical treatment and eventual repatriation. The camp's few doctors, themselves prisoners, are tasked with identifying the most critical cases. They examine hundreds of men, Wilson among them. His pneumonia and malnutrition are serious, but not immediately life-threatening compared to others. "You're not sick enough," the doctor tells him apologetically. "There are men who won't survive another week." Wilson nods, understanding. He watches as 230 prisoners, the most desperately ill, are loaded onto trucks bound for Switzerland. It's a bittersweet moment. Joy for those being freed, mingled with envy and the continued uncertainty of their own fate. The camp falls into an eerie limbo. The German Guard force is steadily reduced as soldiers are reassigned to combat units in a desperate attempt to slow the Allied advance. Those who remain are primarily older men or those with injuries that prevent frontline service. Food deliveries become even more irregular. The camp survives on stockpiled Red Cross parcels and whatever the increasingly sympathetic local German civilians can provide. The breakdown of Nazi authority has led to a curious dynamic. Germans who would have been punished months earlier for aiding prisoners now do so openly. "They're hedging their bets," Miller observes, "making friends with us in case the Americans get here first." The prisoners discuss endlessly which Allied force will reach them first, the Americans from the West or the Soviets from the East. Opinion is divided on which would be preferable. The Soviets are closer, but stories of their treatment of German civilians and even liberated prisoners cause concern. "The Russians might see us as just more enemies," argues a lieutenant in their tent. "Or they might hold us as bargaining chips with the Western Allies." Others counter that liberation is liberation, regardless of who provides it. On April 10, distant explosions rock the camp as Soviet artillery begins shelling German positions just miles away. The remaining German guards grow increasingly nervous. Some desert during the night, slipping away rather than face Soviet captivity. The camp commander assembles the senior prisoner representatives, officers from each Allied nation represented in the camp. "I cannot guarantee your safety if the Russians arrive while German forces are still present," he tells them bluntly. "There will be fighting. Many of you may be killed in the crossfire." The implication is clear. He's considering abandoning the camp rather than defending it. The senior prisoners urge him to leave a minimal guard force, with clear instructions to surrender immediately when Soviet forces arrive. Wilson and the others wait in tense anticipation. Many are too weak to take any action beyond basic survival. They've endured capture, the death march, months of starvation and disease. All they can do now is hold on a little longer and hope they're not killed in the war's final days. On April 18th, the remaining German guards assemble at the main gate. Without ceremony, they march out, leaving the camp effectively unguarded. A cheer rises from the prisoners, quickly tempered by the realization that they're now in a dangerous no-man's land, between retreating German forces and the advancing Soviets. "What now?" Wilson asks Miller as they watch from their tent. "Now," Miller says, "we wait and see who gets here first." April 22, 1945. 4 days after the German guards abandoned Stalag 3A, the first Soviet troops arrive, a reconnaissance unit of the 1st Ukrainian Front. They're greeted with cheers by the prisoners, who've been effectively governing themselves since the Germans left. The Soviet soldiers appear shocked by the condition of the prisoners. Emaciated men in ragged uniforms, many too weak to stand without assistance. They distribute whatever food they have, mostly bread and canned meat, and promise more supplies will follow. Private Wilson watches these developments with cautious optimism. Liberation has finally come, But the manner of it brings new uncertainties. The Soviet officers who arrive the following day speak little English, and their attitude toward the Western prisoners is correct, but reserved. "They don't quite know what to do with us," observes Sergeant Miller. "We're allies, but we're also foreigners behind their lines." Indeed, the Soviets establish a new perimeter around the camp and post guards, ostensibly for the prisoners' protection, but effectively keeping them confined. When asked about repatriation to American lines, the Soviet officers are non-committal, saying only that arrangements will be made through proper channels. Days pass, then weeks. Conditions improve somewhat. Soviet field kitchens provide hot meals, and medical personnel treat the most serious cases. But the prisoners remain in limbo, neither fully free nor prisoners of war in the traditional sense. News of events beyond the camp reaches them sporadically. Berlin is under direct assault. Hitler has reportedly committed suicide. The war in Europe is clearly in its final days. On May 5th, a Soviet political officer addresses the camp through interpreters. "The fascist Germans have been defeated," he announces. "Berlin has fallen to the heroic Red Army. Soon arrangements will be made for your return to your homelands." The prisoners cheer this news, but many remain skeptical about the timeline. Their skepticism proves warranted. May 8th brings news of Germany's unconditional surrender, but no immediate change in their situation. "They're using us as bargaining chips," says an American captain who's been in contact with Soviet headquarters. "The Soviets want their own citizens returned from Western custody before they'll release us." This refers to the thousands of Soviet citizens in Western Allied hands. Some former prisoners, others who had fought alongside the Germans against Stalin's regime. Many don't wish to return to the Soviet Union, fearing persecution or execution for perceived collaboration. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the 106th Infantry Division, now occupying a sector of Germany near Leipzig, information finally arrives about their captured comrades. The division commander shares this with his staff. Thousands of the division's men are in Soviet hands at Stalag 3A, but negotiations for their transfer to American control are proceeding slowly. Political considerations are delaying what should be a straightforward humanitarian action, he tells them in frustration. Back at Stalag 3A, the prisoners' patience begins to wear thin. They've survived the worst of their captivity, only to find freedom tantalizingly out of reach. Some contemplate attempting to reach American lines on their own, but the distance, over 100 miles through Soviet-controlled territory, makes this extremely risky. Finally, on May 20th, American liaison officers arrive at the camp. They're greeted with wild enthusiasm by the prisoners, who pepper them with questions about when they'll be leaving. "We're working on it," is the cautious response. "There are complications. The Soviets have their procedures." Private Wilson, like many others, feels a crushing disappointment. After all they've endured, to be delayed by politics seems an unnecessary cruelty. Sergeant Miller maintains his role as a steadying influence. "We've waited this long," he tells the men in their tent. "A few more days or weeks won't kill us." But for some it might. Despite improved conditions, men continue to die from the long-term effects of their captivity. Diseases that have progressed too far for treatment, bodies too weakened to recover despite proper nutrition. Wilson wonders if he'll be among those who survive the worst, only to die on the threshold of freedom. His health has improved, but he remains fragile. Each day brings new rumors about their departure, and each day ends in disappointment. May 25th, 1945. After weeks of diplomatic wrangling, an agreement is finally reached for the transfer of American and British prisoners from Soviet custody. Private Wilson and the others at Stalag 3A receive word that they'll be transported to American lines within days. The news is met with cautious optimism. They've heard promises before. But this time, preparations are visible. Soviet trucks arrive at the camp. Lists are compiled. Medical evaluations are conducted to determine who needs specialized transport.
On May 27th, the process begins. Prisoners are loaded onto Soviet trucks in groups of 40. Wilson finds himself in the same vehicle as Sergeant Miller and several others from their tent. "Didn't I tell you we'd make it?" Miller says, allowing himself a rare smile. The convoy travels west for several hours, eventually reaching the Elbe River, the agreed demarcation line between Soviet and American forces. As they cross the bridge at Torgau, Wilson catches his first glimpse of American soldiers waiting on the western bank. The emotion is overwhelming. Men who have endured months of captivity with stoic determination now break down in tears. Wilson feels a surge of conflicting emotions: relief, joy, exhaustion, and an unexpected grief for those who didn't survive to see this moment. American medical personnel immediately take charge of the former prisoners. They're evaluated, deloused, given clean uniforms, and provided with hot meals. Wilson finds himself on a stretcher despite his protests that he can walk. "Standard procedure, Private," a medic tells him. "You've been through enough. Let us take care of you now." The next days pass in a blur of medical examinations, debriefings, and paperwork. Wilson is diagnosed with malnutrition, pneumonia, and post-traumatic stress, though the latter doesn't yet have a formal name in military medicine. He's classified as requiring extended hospitalization before repatriation to the United States. On June 1st, he's transferred to a field hospital near Frankfurt. There, a surprise awaits him. Sergeant Miller is in an adjacent ward. "They're keeping us together all the way home," Miller tells him during a visit. "The whole division. They're sending us back on hospital ships starting next week." Indeed, surviving members of the 106th Division receive priority for return to the United States. The Army, aware of the exceptional hardships they've endured, has made this decision as a humanitarian gesture and for morale purposes. Wilson writes his first letter home since his capture, informing his parents that he's alive and will be returning soon. He knows they've likely received notification of his prisoner status months ago, but direct word from him will mean more than any official communication. On June 10, he's transported to Bremerhaven along with hundreds of other former prisoners and wounded soldiers. There, the USNS Comfort awaits, a white hospital ship with red crosses emblazoned on its hull. The sight of the American flag flying above it brings another wave of emotion. Wilson is carried aboard on a stretcher, still too weak for extended walking. He's assigned to a ward with other former POWs, many from the 106th Division. The familiar faces, gaunt and aged beyond their years, but alive, provide a profound comfort. The ship sails on June 12th, beginning the journey across the Atlantic. For the first time in 6 months, Wilson sleeps without fear. No guards, no hunger, no uncertainty about survival. The nightmares remain, but the reality upon waking is one of safety. Medical care aboard the Comfort is exemplary. Wilson receives treatments for his pneumonia, a carefully planned diet to address his malnutrition, and the first tentative psychiatric support for what will later be recognized as severe trauma. "You're going to recover fully, physically," a doctor tells him during a checkup. "The rest may take longer. Don't expect to be the same person you were before. No one is, after what you've been through." It's both a warning and a reassurance, acknowledgement that his experiences have fundamentally changed him, but that this change is normal, expected, even necessary. As the American coastline appears on the horizon after 10 days at sea, Wilson joins other ambulatory patients on deck. The sight of New York Harbor and the Statue of Liberty brings many to tears. "We made it," Sergeant Miller says simply, standing beside him at the rail. "We kept our promise." Wilson nods, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They have indeed made it home. But the memories of those who didn't, who died in the frozen foxholes of the Ardennes, on the death march across Germany, or in the stalags, will remain with them always. July 1945, Thomas Army Hospital, Battle Creek, Michigan. Private Wilson has been transferred here for continued recovery and rehabilitation. His physical health is improving steadily. He's gained 20 pounds, his pneumonia has cleared, and his strength is slowly returning. The psychological wounds prove more persistent. Nightmares plague his sleep, vivid recreations of the death march, the boxcars, the starvation at the stalags. He startles at loud noises. Crowds make him anxious. These symptoms are common among the former prisoners, the doctors explain. They have a name for it now: prisoner of war syndrome, though understanding and treatment remain rudimentary. Give it time, counsels a psychiatrist during their weekly session. What you're experiencing is a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. Wilson isn't convinced. Nothing feels normal anymore. The disconnect between civilian life, which continues around him as if the war never happened, and his experiences creates a chasm that seems unbridgeable. Sergeant Miller visits regularly. Now Staff Sergeant Miller, promoted upon repatriation, he's recovering at the same facility. Their shared experiences create a bond that requires no explanation, no awkward attempts to describe the indescribable. "Have you heard about the division reunion?" Miller asks during one visit. Wilson shakes his head. "They're planning one for December, the one-year anniversary of the Ardennes, in Indianapolis." Wilson is uncertain. The thought of revisiting those memories voluntarily seems masochistic. Yet there's an undeniable pull: the chance to connect with others who understand, to honor those who didn't return. "Think about it," Miller says, not pressing. "It might help." In August, Wilson receives his honorable discharge from the Army. His medical condition is deemed sufficient for release from military service, but with a 60% disability rating, acknowledging the long-term impacts of his captivity. Returning to his family's farm in Ohio is both joyful and disorienting. His parents treat him like glass, careful and concerned. Friends from before the war don't know how to act around him. The girl he'd planned to marry has become engaged to someone else, a common story among returning POWs who were missing for extended periods. Wilson finds himself drawn to solitude, spending hours walking the perimeter of the farm's fields. The open space and freedom of movement are therapeutic after the confinement of the stalags. He begins to help with farm work as his strength returns, finding that physical labor provides temporary respite from his thoughts. In November, a letter arrives from Staff Sergeant Miller, now living in Pennsylvania. It confirms details of the division reunion and urges Wilson to attend. "We need to see each other," Miller writes, "to remember together. It's the only way forward." After much consideration, Wilson decides to go. His parents are supportive, perhaps hoping this communion with fellow survivors will help their son find his way back to himself. The reunion, held at a hotel in Indianapolis on December 16, 1945, exactly 1 year after the German offensive began, is both heartbreaking and healing. Over 500 survivors of the 106th attend, including many former POWs. They share stories, memorialize the lost, and find understanding that civilians cannot provide. Major General Alan Jones, the division's former commander, addresses the gathering. What happened to the 106th was not a failure of courage or duty. You were placed in an impossible situation and fought with honor. The sacrifice of those we lost and the suffering of those captured must never be forgotten. For Wilson, the reunion becomes a turning point. The collective acknowledgement of their experiences validates his own. He's not alone in his struggle to readjust, not unique in his nightmares and anxiety. There is comfort in this shared burden. He reconnects with men from his unit, exchanges addresses with Sergeant Miller and others. They promise to write, to stay in touch, to be resources for each other in the years ahead. As 1945 draws to a close, Wilson begins to contemplate his future. The GI Bill offers educational opportunities. His disability pension provides some financial security. The path forward remains unclear. But for the first time since his return, he feels capable of moving along it. The wounds, physical and psychological, will never fully heal. The memories will never completely fade. But survival, Wilson is beginning to understand, isn't merely about enduring. It's about finding meaning in what was endured, about honoring those who didn't make it by living fully. In the quiet of the Ohio winter, as snow blankets the farm in a way that once would have triggered only traumatic memories, he begins to see it differently, as beauty rather than threat, as peace rather than peril. It's a small shift, but significant. A beginning. Present day, the Ardennes forest, Belgium. Snow falls softly among the pine trees, coating the memorial that stands at Schönberg, the site where thousands of American soldiers from the 106th Division were captured in December 1944. The memorial, a simple stone monument with bronze plaques, commemorates what military historians now recognize as one of the most challenging episodes faced by American forces during World War II. The text acknowledges the sacrifice of the 106th Division, which suffered the highest casualty rate of any American division during a comparable time period in the European theater. The forests have reclaimed much of the battlefield. Foxholes, once desperate shelters for freezing soldiers, are now just shallow depressions in the forest floor. Artillery-shattered trees have been replaced by decades of new growth. Nature is healed, though the land retains the memory of what transpired here. In American military history, the story of the 106th Division has undergone a significant reevaluation. Initially portrayed as a failure, green troops who surrendered en masse, the division's experience is now understood within its proper context. They were placed in an impossible tactical situation, stretched too thin along a too wide front, and hit by overwhelming German force at the precise point of attack. The veterans of the 106th who survived both combat and captivity lived with the consequences for the rest of their lives. Physical ailments stemming from frostbite, malnutrition, and untreated injuries plagued many into old age. The psychological impact, what we now recognize as PTSD, affected marriages, careers, and family relationships for decades. Private James Wilson, whose journey we followed, returned to school after the war, earning a degree in agriculture from Ohio State University under the GI Bill. He married in 1948, had 3 children, and operated his family farm until retirement. Like many veterans, he rarely spoke of his wartime experiences until late in life, when he began sharing his story with historians and school groups, recognizing the importance of first-hand testimony. Sergeant Frank Miller became a high school history teacher in Pennsylvania, dedicated to ensuring that future generations understood the realities of war beyond the sanitized versions in textbooks. He maintained correspondence with many former prisoners until his death in 2012. The Golden Lions of the 106th Infantry Division hold reunions to this day, though their numbers have dwindled dramatically as age claims those whom war could not. Sons, daughters, and grandchildren now attend, carrying forward the memory of what happened in the frozen forests of the Ardennes. Each year on December 16th, wreaths are laid at memorials in Belgium, Luxembourg, and at Arlington National Cemetery. The date marks the beginning of what history records as the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last major offensive in the West, but what the men of the 106th experienced as a sudden descent into horror that would alter their lives forever. The snow continues to fall on the Ardennes, soft and silent. A deceptive peace not unlike that which preceded the storm in 1944. But now, it falls on a Europe that has known 75 years of peace among former enemies. Perhaps the most meaningful memorial to those who suffered and died here.